Hello, welcome everyone. This is Eddie Liger here, joined with the ever shirtless and ever ripped Carlos Garrido over there to my virtual right or left, depending on where you're standing from. Um, Today we're going to have a very fun stream. We're going to talk about current events, politics, philosophy, and everything else that we talk about in these streams. We're going to have a whole lot of fun. Stick around, ask as many questions as you want, and as always, super chat questions get priority. This is a people's funded grassroots institute, and we promise Eddie is going to have a shirt on by the time we come back, unless you guys request that he doesn't. So
yeah, we'll see.
We'll see you on a bit. Stick around. You're not going to want to miss this one.
High Sheriff Hazard is a hard man to be. High Sheriff is his only plan. He digs through pockets, takes what he can, for he's High Sheriff Hazard. He caught me one evening, and here's what he said. You look like a Russian, you look like a red. And if you're fond of your skin and your head, beware the High Sheriff of Hazard.
Oh, my bad. Sorry.
He does the cut, and now he's allergic to shirts. I love that intro. I love that intro. It makes Danny look like a swole fat Joe.
Like this. That's perfect. That my camera zoomed in.
Danny peak bulk. That's what it is.
It is.
Danny trained in the 90s with Tom Platz. That's where the footage is from. What's up, brother? How you doing? Just got back from trials.
Good, yeah. I'm feeling a lot better than I was last week, that's for sure. Got some food in me. I went home to see my parents this week, so that's why I'm on the iPad rather than the laptop. I'm going to spend some time with the family and hopefully relax and recover. I got sick after cutting all that weight and wrestling, which is pretty, predictable. So feeling better now, recovering. As far as the wrestling, I went 1-2, which the tournament before that I had gone 0-2, and that's really discouraging when you're not able to win a match. So I was kind of questioning whether I wanted to keep doing it or not, but was able to win a match against the 6th seed, against a kid who had gotten 3rd at the trials in the past, or not a kid, a man, I guess, who had gotten 3rd at the U.S. Open or World Team Trials in the past. So that was a good win. And then felt good in the other 2 matches. Just I cut about 25 pounds, so I got to find a way to get down to that weight without gassing myself out and able to wrestle a full tournament. But it was a blast. I'm excited to keep training. But yeah, I'm also excited to put some time into the ACP and Midwestern Marks here in the coming months. Gonna be doing a lot more streams and stuff like that. And then Kyle and I are also planning on taking a lot of trips around the country to visit various ACP chapters and do organizing together and help get the chapters rolling. So if you are not in ACP yet, please, acp.us, join the party. And hopefully we will be meeting face to face very soon.
Yeah, that all sounds very exciting. You looked sickly last week. Like, you looked physically good, ripped, but you looked sick. Your face, you had like the eye bags, and it was a tough weight, I know, for you to maintain. As someone who sees the background of things, I know it was tough. Um, but when's the next when are the next competitions?
It'll be a little bit. They'll have to wrestle. The World Championships will be in Albania, which maybe it's a blessing in disguise. I didn't make it because I know a lot of Albanian nationalists who might show up at the tournament and jump me for my views on Serbia and stuff. But they'll have that coming up, and then the next trials will be sometime probably in the first half of next year.
Nice. So there's time. Are you planning on going back up to the weight that you were at before you had to cut, or?
That's a good question. I don't know because I'll have the option. This tournament I didn't have the option, but next year I will. So we'll have to figure it out and see where my body's at. I'll have to. I had a month-long training camp for this one, and I think I could make that weight easier if I were to have a 3-month training camp versus 1. But yeah, we'll figure it out as we go. I'm just gonna focus on wrestling for now and trying to get better. Long live Hoxa.
Those are the guys that are going to beat up Eddie. Go to Albania. Comrade Jay says, my daughter started wrestling, Eddie. It's the fastest growing sport for girls and women in the U.S.
It is. At my wrestling club, we have a lot of girls. We actually have probably as many girls as we have boys, which is amazing. And it's the fastest growing sport, but also like, these girls can go a long way right now because it's very new. So a lot of them are at the same level. So like we had a girl who was her first or second year wrestling this year, and she was able to win state in freestyle just by like working her butt off and being athletic, which is pretty unheard of in your first year wrestling. But the level of girls wrestling, it's crazy how it's gone up. I remember like 10 or 15 years ago, Terry Steiner, who was the head U.S. girls coach, said that, the girls wrestling at the Olympic level is like comparable to high school JV. And that was just his honest assessment. But nowadays it's not like that at all. The top women in the country would whoop any high school JV wrestler. The level has just gone up and up and up. And a lot of girls have embraced it. And it's really been cool to see. And it's a very different thing coaching girls versus coaching boys. It's like, give them something to do and let them do it and make it hard so that they burn out their energy, right? And just kind of put parameters on them. Versus girls, you can actually teach. They'll actually sit there and listen and try to understand what you're saying. Some boys do that, but it's more rare. So yeah.
That's awesome. It's a sport that makes you tough as nails. And I've seen various former wrestlers who have podcasts now talk about how incredibly, how much the level of fortitude of mind that you have to be a wrestler. And that's something that I've seen in the years that we've been friends, that I've been able to see your journey here. It's something that I think all athletes share in, but man, wrestlers take it to a whole nother level. It's insane. But Alex says, Albanian nationalist here. Love you, Eddie. Albania has a long and beautiful communist history.
That's badass. I haven't met many Albanian nationalists like this who are, uphold the communist legacy. It's usually the other kind of nationalist. So that's awesome. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Alex. Powell coming with a big, huge $24 donation. Thank you so much, comrade. Powell is a consistent super chatter here. Powell says, hi, comrades. I started to read Theory. Das Kapital Volume 1 is extremely dense. Yes. I have to read a page several times to get the essence. Progress is reading this slow, but funnily enough, what I read and understand, I remember. That's it's those things that you have to break your head the hardest with that you remember the best. I remember when I first started systematically reading Hegel. I had to just take a whole year basically off to only focus on that, read the primary material, and combine the primary material with like 2 or 3 secondary texts from leading scholars in the area touching upon the same thing, and then go back again to the it was such a back and forth, but it's been the sort of thing that, I mean, 4 or 5 years have passed since that sort of year-long hiatus of Hegel, but it's so fresh in my mind. And then there's things that I don't have to struggle that much with, and I can recall here and there, but I mean, there's quotes that I could just pull out of my back pocket with Hegel. But as far as reading Marx, if you haven't read anything before, I don't know if Das Kapital is Volume 1 is the best thing to start with. I know Eddie can give you a few recommendations there since he did the same thing, and I don't know if he would recommend someone else takes the road he took.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder how it would have been though if I would have had a channel like Midwestern Marx that was sort of guiding me through Volume 1, because that didn't really exist when we were learning, when Carlos and I were learning Marxism 4 years ago. Like, that's why I was so excited when I found Infrared, because I was like, holy cow, another Marxist-Leninist YouTuber. I mean, there were a few, but not really any breaking down Capital. And now, like, Professor Derek Ford has done a decent breakdown, and I used David Harvey's videos at the time. But I mean, if you feel like you're understanding the information, because that is possible, like it is absolutely possible if you take your time with Capital Volume 1 to understand it on the first time through, or at least understand it on the surface level, and then you can go back and dive deeper and even better, including those first 3 chapters, even though they are, insanely dense. But it is possible. I would just say, if you feel like you're breaking your head over it and taking way too long, then maybe take a break and read something like Value, Price, and Profit. That's like Wage, Labor, and Capital, Value, Price, and Profit. They're 2 pamphlets that are like 80 pages total that'll sum up the economic arguments of capital and kind of give you some of the vocabulary or the definitions, so to speak, or I should say categories. Gives you some of the categories, to use the Hegelian term that Marx is using, and you'll be able to breeze through it, and then maybe go back to Capital. But yeah, I would just say take your time and don't, make sure to take breaks and read the easy stuff too, because there's all these pamphlets that, like, you'll be reading Capital, it's really hard, then you'll grab a pamphlet and you can just zip right through it, and it's kind of like a brain break, but you're also feeding your brain the same kind of information that you're going to get from Capital. So but yeah, that good job diving into it, because that's the first step, and that's what a lot of people are scared to do, or they feel like they can't. But as difficult of a book as it is, especially the first 3 chapters, its difficulty has been overstated. Like, you can understand it, and there were literally like illiterate peasants in China like using Lenin to teach themselves to read, and then reading Capital. So like, you can do it, and it's easier with the guides that exist now. But yeah, don't fry your brain is all I'll say.
Marius out here dropping truth bombs.
I'm about to do a Marius laugh at that one. That was freaking hilarious.
Marius has the best laugh in all of American communism. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't recommend starting with Capital Volume 1, but you can do it, and I would say supplement. I have a mentally disabled dog right next to me. You can do it
Uh-oh.
secondary material on capital, but some of the more prevalent stuff is like very problematic. It's rooted in the monthly review school of economics, which I like some of the stuff monthly review puts out, but the tendency of Paul Sweezy and Barron and all the other guys was to kind of, it was like revisionism in the sphere of political economy. They rejected the labor theory of value. They rejected the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. They rejected so many central aspects that are like the breakthroughs that Marxism brings about in classical political economy. So,
Yeah.
I have to deal with this talk.
Okay,
You know,
I have
one
something
second.
to say. You can deal with
I'm
it.
not going to eat him, but
I mean, do what you got to do. I wanted to say something too, because I mentioned David Harvey earlier, and so I think someone in the chat said David Harvey's okay. Yeah, he's he understands capital really well. He's read it, 50 plus times, but I would recommend, and I've heard other people like I think Vijay Prashad has said this.
oh, I see that Eddie froze. Is it just Eddie or is it me? Someone let me know in the comments if it's just if I'm frozen too. Uh-oh. It's just Eddie? Damn. Eddie looks like the lights went off. Okay. Let me text him and let him know that his signal went out. Hopefully he hops back in soon. But what I was going to say to Comrade Pavel, thunderstorm took my power out for a second. Should be back soon. Okay. What I was going to say to Comrade Pavel is that some of the central secondary literature on Marx's Capital is kind of disappointing. I have one of the books somewhere back there under that blue book. That's from Michael Heinrich. It's an introduction to the 3 volumes of Capital. Someone who has read the 3 volumes of Capital, it is kind of, it's a mix, man. It's I can see it helping some beginners, but it's also going to be that sort of help that you'll need eventually help to kind of undo, at least aspects of it. I find aspects of it problematic. And again, it's mainly because it's coming from this monthly review school of Marxist economics. And I think the monthly review people have become a lot less sectarian when it comes to that. I've seen people who don't adhere to that interpretation of Marxist economics published there. Someone like Paul Cockshott, who's a writer for the Institute. He's written a few papers for us. There was one that he did defending the labor theory of value that Monthly Review republished. So, I mean, clearly they're not as strict in terms of the line that they're taking with questions on political economy that they used to. But Eddie was thunderstruck by a divine revelation. Eddie's got the communist Wi-Fi. No, the communist Wi-Fi is like the fucking, the Chinese Wi-Fi is insane. I've heard that it's so incredibly fast. I'm not a tech nerd. I'm a tech caveman is how I like to describe myself. Whereas someone who's technologically challenged. But when I've talked to my sister and shown her some of the vlogs that I watch from people in China, Westerners that live in China, one of the things that always impresses her is how quick the internet is. But let's hope they're on 6G. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't know the tech side of it, but I mean, the friends that I have talked to that have gone to China, they all express a similar sentiment. It's almost like hopping on a time machine and going 100 years into the future. It's insane how advanced they are. Are you familiar with Kilman and Marxist humanist tendency? That name sounds super familiar. What comes to mind, though, I think there's a Kilman that develops TSSI interpretation of Marxist economics, which are people that are trying to defend the uh, the labor theory of value, the conception of contradictory value production, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, Marxist crisis theory, all these different things. And one of the main researchers in that field, one of the main writers, is Alan Freeman, uh, who I believe wrote with Kilman. I might be confusing them, but I'm pretty sure that's what I'm pretty sure uh, that they both wrote a few of the most important TSSI texts together. I think they have some divergences. I believe Kilman has recently taken some of the more mainstream Marxist academic positions on geopolitical matters. Last time we spoke with Alan, we talked a little bit about that, but I want to go to China one day. Yeah, I would like to too. What's crazy? All of the reactionaries, whenever we start talking about communism, what do they say? They always say, "Why don't you go to China? Why don't you go to China?" And maybe if it was like 1950, that could be an argument with some weight. Like who, let the Chinese develop out of their semi-feudal conditions, and we can help and show solidarity. But um, it's definitely not tempting going from the comfort and security of middle-class life in America in the 1950s to going to help China or something. But like in 2024, to say why don't you go to China is like the equivalent of you know it's it's so preposterous because our lives would be so easy in China. Like I hope you guys know that everything I've heard from China, and I've talked to people who have suggested that I go there to like teach and stuff. Everything that I've heard is that if you are a young American or Westerner that speaks English, if you align yourself ideologically with Marxism, Leninism, which of course we do, um, you will succeed tremendously. Like I can go to China, have a regular job in like the service sector or something, and live more comfortably than I would here in the U.S. as an adjunct professor, and I wouldn't have to care a lick about the $100,000 that I've been forced to accumulate in student debt because of the American regime, to use a word that's their favorite. It was a debt that was accrued in a very interesting way, right? Because debt is something that binds you to someone else or to another entity, and it's a form of binding that's conjoined with domination, with demands that people are making on you. It's a form of enslavement, really. For a long period of time, that was conjoined to a form of enslavement. Um, and what was it that led to that indebtedness that I have and that's now dragging my family as we're trying to develop? It was the audacity to want to get an education. It was because I wanted to get an advanced education, something which I received the highest levels of scholarship for, that I ended up having to go $100,000 in debt with my wife in order to study. So it's so completely preposterous that that's how you reward the people that want to become like cultured and be educated and hopefully be productive citizens in their societies. But those are the sorts of contradictions that come out in the times of capitalist crisis, such as the ones that we're living in. We've been living in a period of perpetual capitalist crisis since at least 2008. Various scholars have noted that's it's been nonstop crisis for the vast majority of people. Thank you so much, Pavel, for another 12 euro super chat. I am tired of the shit of NATO and the US. I would love to go to China, but Mandarin is not easy. No, it's not. I'm 39, so no idea if this is possible for me and my wife. And my wife, I'm guessing you mean your wife. I started to learn Russian as a backup. Yeah, you know what's crazy? Marx was like 50 something when he learned Russian, and it was mainly out of research interest. He wanted to be able to read more about the Russian Община, the Russian Commune, and Russian history. And he loved Nikolai Chernyshevsky. So he just says, I'm going to learn Russian midway through his 50s, and he ends up doing it. But I think Mandarin is a whole nother monster. There's no alphabet, it's just a bunch of characters. And I have read that, Chinese kids themselves, they really fully learn the language when they're like 10. So Eddie's gonna have the Porsche from Californication. I don't know if that's a cultural reference, but
there's a thunderstorm going on right here, so my Wi-Fi was recovering there. But what I was saying was, for those reading volume 1, like, David Harvey's Companion is good, but like Carlos was saying, he rejects the labor theory of value, which, like, I would say David Harvey has one of the better understandings of capital in the Western world. He's read all 3 volumes like upwards of 50 times because he teaches them every year. But if you reject the LTV, you're kind of rejecting the whole premise of the whole series, and you're ceding it to the neoclassicals.
Yep.
And you're doing so incorrectly, rather than doing what Cockshot does and showing the correlation or testing, more so than showing. He shows it, his results based on these tests that he runs. He shows the correlation between price and labor, and he shows that labor is ultimately the source of surplus value in our society still, and that the neoclassicals are incorrect, and that the whole reason they came up with their price astrology and tried to say that supply and demand are the only determinants of price was to explain away Marxism, explain away the LTV, and David Harvey accepts that, and that's a product of him being in Western academia and him being influenced by these neoclassicals who, in economics, especially back in the 80s and 90s, were, it's like a dogma, it's like a religion, the way they look at neoclassical economics and the supply and demand equilibrium. So, which is really just the labor value. But yeah. So read it on your own, even though the companions can be helpful. I would say don't. And the companion itself is like 400 pages. So if you read it, it's also going to take you more time. So I would say just read it, and then, like I said, read Value, Price, and Profit, Wage, Labor, and Capital, and then the supplemental material that Carlos was recommending, and the supplemental material that we have now, because
he froze a little bit there at the end, but yeah, we do have some good material out there. Specifically, off the top of my mind, I know that in Professor Thomas Riggins's Reading the Classical Texts of Marxism, there's a section that explains the political economy section of Engels' Anti-Düring, which is basically a summary of all of the developments that Marxism makes in the area of political economy and its critique of political economy. Yes, the labor theory of value was the theory that was used to understand value by all of the classical political economists. It's something that's basically developed by John Locke in the 16th century, 17th century. Forgetting now when Locke is writing, 17th century. It's developed by Locke, but it's basically sustained by most of the political economists. But they come to this dilemma, which is, where the hell does profit come from? Because the idea that they have is that what is being bought by the capitalists is labor. They have the idea that labor is a source of all value. What's being bought by the capitalists is labor. And so they end up with this predicament where they have to figure out where the hell profit comes from. Some of them say that, well, profit is a result of the labor of the capitalists. Profit is the form that the wage of the capitalist takes. There's others that say other things like, profit is a result of the fact that the capitalists took all of the cost of production and jacked it up. So what ends up, the essence of that theory is that profit is something that comes about in the sphere of like circulation. When things are being sold, you jack up the price. That's where like the extra comes from. And Marx debunks this meticulously in the first few sections of the first volume of Capital. And he's debunking that precisely because he's debunking the theories that were developed by the classical political economists who had a labor theory of value, but who couldn't understand where surplus was coming from. Surplus was a very mysterious, the commodity itself was a very mysterious, odd, it was filled with, what is it, divine something, a metaphysical subtleties. He has a very famous phrase on the section on the commodity fetish, where he has this expression about how queer a thing commodities are. But the thing was that what Marx's real revelation, which is thanks in part to the fact that he was a good Aristotelian as well, is the realization that what the capitalist buys is not labor, but labor power. Once you realize that they buy labor power and not labor, you have the potential to realize that what they're paying for that labor power is not it's not equivalent to what's coming out, because labor is the one commodity that has a special utility of being able to be a source of more value than it itself contains.
Oh, I just put more goldfish in my mouth. I thought you were going to keep going. No, yeah, that was... Sorry. Yeah, Marx...
That was a bad timing.
Really, what Marx
It's like
does...
when the waitress or waiter comes and you're halfway through in your food and they're like, so how is it? And you're just there thinking like, if you would have came 3 seconds ago, I wouldn't have had half a chicken in my mouth. But
exactly. No, what Marx does with the labor theory of value is takes it to its full conclusions, or he expands the analysis. So he takes the labor theory of value that's been developed by the classical political economists, and he traces it throughout the entire economy and shows where they were right and where they were wrong. And at the time, pretty much everybody accepted the labor theory of value, and the idea that, and Marx is one of the first to say that at a point, especially with the development of the financial system, price can become detached from value.
Yep.
Or a price can, go way off from what the amount of labor time in it is. And people ridiculously say, I had an economics professor would say this in college, that Marx never looks at supply and demand, but in volume 3, he mentions supply and demand like 500 times. And he talks about how they create, price shocks, which then react back on the scale of production and the actual amount of labor going into production. And, it's got sort of a dialectical relationship with supply and demand that causes the price to rotate around or fluctuate around equilibrium, which is really the labor value. But and then you have Alfred Marshall, who was like really the first economist who didn't accept this labor theory of value, says no, price is solely determined by supply and demand, which Paul Cockshott has critiqued and shown how supply and demand aren't actually like quantifiable or measurable. So you can't prove that there's any direct correlation between them and price, but you can show that there's a direct correlation between labor time in every industry and the price of the goods in that industry, at least in the industries that produce real physical commodities. And the reason that supply and demand in neoclassical economics takes off, this non-labor theory of value-based economics takes off, is because Marx brought classical political economy to its rational conclusion.
Yep.
After Capital, they could no longer accept the labor theory of value without accepting that capitalism is this inherently contradictory, crises-ridden system that is driven by the exploitation of surplus value and the realization of that value through its sale and the accumulation of capital. There was no denying that after Marx, if you were to accept the labor theory of value. So what are post-Marx, you see the neoclassical school arise rather than the classical school. And it's this whole field of economics that's basically a pseudoscience or a dogma that's based on price astrology rather than actually understanding the economy in a materialist way, or the system in a materialist way. And it's become dominant because it's been pushed out by corporations and think tanks and the likes of Milton Friedman, to the point where even some Marxist economists for a while, like David Harvey, were accepting it. And that's a real tragedy because it should have never been accepted. The labor theory of value still holds true, and if you erase the labor theory of value, you're erasing so much of the Marxist analysis that's important. So as a political economist myself, I know I'm younger than David Harvey and he's read Capital more times than me, but I really think that's a mistake to see the labor theory of value to these neoclassical price astrologists.
Yeah, and it's Engels, his speech at the graveside of Marx, he says there's two things that Marx discovers. He discovers the law of the development of history, and he discovers the labor theory of value. To take away the labor theory of value is to take away like one of the central things that makes Marxism, one of the central components of what it brings to universal history. By
Lenin
the way,
says
shout out
that
to
too.
Yeah.
That capital is the proof of the labor theory of value. Sorry.
Yeah. Shout out to Comrade CJ for becoming a member of the American Communist Party. If you guys haven't joined and are willing to join and have the discipline and time to do so, make sure to do so at acp.us. And thank you so much, Comrade, for the $2 super sticker.
Let's go.
Josh here says, Josh from Platteville / Dubuque.
I've been there.
Not so much irrelevant, but kind of is. What are your thoughts on AI diminishing being human and being a living soul with experiences?
I have this. There's an interesting debate between Jack Ma and Elon Musk on this, and I think Jack Ma had a much more dialectical and Marxist view, which I'm sure. I don't think he's like a communist or anything. I think he's just a random businessman in China, but obviously had a more dialectical or Marxist way of looking at things than Musk, just by product of living in China. And he said AI is basically like any other tool that was invented by humans, but it's ultimately humans who can shut it off, and they're ultimately machines that we can control like any other machine. Now, you might not accept that. You might accept that AI is actually, like human. But I don't think we've reached that point yet at all. It's still, basically just a computer program, a super quick Googler. And, just like Photoshop, you could have made the same argument about Photoshop. This isn't real art. This is technology. This diminishes what it means to create real art. But, or you could look at it as a tool that allows you to create new kinds of art, and that's kind of how I tend to look at AI. And I think, it represents an advancement in technology and the forces of production that we should use as Marxists, right? If we can use AI to blow up on Twitter or to use them in my TikToks, I think why not use the advancements in technology that capitalism brings about to try and fight capitalism. But maybe that's me being naive, and maybe there's more to AI than I'm seeing, and it will become sentient. The stuff that worries me the most that I see right now that I would never do in a million years is the people putting like the chips in their hand, but that has less to do. I mean, it does, because it's like becoming cybernetic, and that's what like the World Economic Forum and stuff are pushing, is making us robots so we can be completely controllable slaves. Klaus Schwab is big on that idea, and I'm completely against that, but I feel like that's less AI and more just them trying to use tech to turn us into slaves, and that absolutely would make us less human. So I'm totally against that and Elon Musk's Neuralink and stuff, but I do think there's a very positive side to AI, and I think sometimes the risks are overblown, and I think that tends to happen with technological advancements, where anytime there's this leap in technology that we haven't seen before, our minds go to science fiction books, and does this represent the end of humanity? And I don't know that it does, but I'm not an expert either.
Yeah, I mean, this like the hysteria over technological developments has always been there. I think that's the first thing we have to recognize. Like, we aren't the first generation to be like, oh my God, everything's everything's going to shit because of advancements in automation. And what matters is the context, right? Under socialism, such advancements would make would create the opportunities for people to have more socially available free time, so that the machines could do more and humans can have more free time to just be creative and do whatever they want. Under capitalism, it means unemployment. It means having to get more working hours because the jobs on the side that you get are more precarious and have less benefits and less pay. And so the consequences that we are expecting from AI are rooted in the sort of hellish form of life that we exist in, that limits the imaginary for what we could do as a species with these technologies. If we lived in a form of life that actually had as its basis the thriving of society, the betterment of humanity, then we would look cheerfully upon AI, because we could see it, as Eddie mentioned, as a tool that can create more free time or potential for human beings, in the same way that tools give us potentials that on the basis of just our hands we wouldn't be able to have.
Absolutely. Yeah, I tend to have the same view. Maybe we're being naive about it. Maybe we need to go back and watch iRobot. But agreed, I don't want to be some kind of Luddite or anything. I just think AI will make the wealth gap even worse. Yeah, I mean, it's another form of automation for sure. I mean, that's the other aspect is, and Marx talks about this obviously a lot in the back half of Capital Volume 1, how, advancements of technology under capitalism, when they should liberate us from having to do a lot of this terrible work, they actually throw people into unemployment. And they allow capitalists to automate away our jobs and make life worse. And that's one of the inherent contradictions of capitalism. As we automate more labor, it makes life worse for people rather than better. And AI is just, the newest form of that. And it's going to throw a lot of graphic designers and editors and stuff out of work, when it should make their jobs easier. It should be a tool that those people get to use, but instead it's going to be something that throws them in unemployment.
I absolutely agree. And I've made some masterpieces thanks to AI, and I'm not a very creative, artistic person, but I've been able to make like Marx into a bodybuilder. I've been able to make Marx into someone who drives like Mustangs or stuff like that. I have some great pictures, one of which I would like to show if I can, but I'm looking for it right now. So Eddie, if you can say a few things.
Yeah, we got a super chat here from Josh. Thank you so much, Josh, for the $20 super chat. That's huge. Getting some big ones today. Soon I will be driving a Porsche with Midwestern Marks decals on it, thanks to you all. Josh says, hi guys, do you have any thoughts on Aristotle's natural slave theory and the belief in male superiority to women as text politics? Does that plus the support of the Greek Empire make him an imperialist? That's a Carlos question, so I'll wait till he has his AI picture of Marx here. You almost got it up, Carlos?
Yeah, I'm uploading it now to the StreamYard so that I can share it. It's a very substantive picture that's definitely more substantive than John's amazing question. But without AI, I wouldn't have been able to make that. So that's why I'm appreciative. I wanted to make a synthesis of Ronnie Coleman and Karl Marx. But thank you so much, John. I was obviously joking. This is a much more important thing to tackle. Do you have any thoughts on Aristotle's natural slave theory and the belief in male superiority to his women? Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is the component of the natural slave theory. It's like it's not racialized. So when we think about that, like it's not like in the same racialized form that we see it in the pseudosciences, the race sciences of the 19th century, specifically in the US and in other parts of Europe. One of the biggest downfalls of Aristotle, and I'm doing a paper on this, Marx talks about Aristotle at the beginning of Capital Volume 1 because he was so close to understanding value. He was able to see the distinction between use value and exchange value, and how in exchange value, use value is present, and vice versa. And he was absolutely brilliant. He was so close. But why was Aristotle not able to understand what was that thing that allowed for the commensurability of radically different things in the form of prices, in the form of having on exchange value, irrespective of how different they are. Why did he fail? And Marx says he failed because he did not have a conception of humanity, because humanity was still stratified, because there was natural slaves and citizens and everyone else. And because there wasn't a foundation of what would be produced by the Enlightenment and to a certain extent the Renaissance as well, of all humans are equal as human beings. Because there wasn't that, Aristotle couldn't fathom the idea that it was human labor, different forms of human labor, that ends up getting abstracted. That's where abstract labor comes from, and then becoming the basis for the commensurability of value as exchange value. So the natural slave stuff and the sexism is, of course, complete bullshit, right? That's not the rational. That's the mystical shell from Aristotle that we leave behind. But it really affected him because he was almost there at figuring out value in the way that Marx did, but he couldn't do it. And the paradox is that what allowed Marx to figure out the quandary of value was an Aristotelian category, which is the category of potency. Because as I mentioned earlier, the way he's able to solve the problem is by recognizing at the beginning that what the capitalist buys is labor power, not labor. And that conception of labor power presupposes an understanding of the distinction between act and potency that Aristotle develops in order to answer the Parmenidean, so coming from Parmenides and the Eleatics, problem of change. So does it make him an imperialist? He was supportive of the Macedonian empire because he was the tutor of Alexander the Great. And when Alexander the Great's empire falls, the Greeks go to kill Aristotle, and he basically flees from Athens, and he says, "I'm not going to let Athens sin twice against philosophy," because just a couple of generations prior they had just killed Socrates. So there's a lot of rational kernels in Aristotle's politics, and some people have even gone as far as to say, and I kind of agree with this, that if you remove the natural slavery component and the sexism and all these other stuff, the sort of ideal society, the ideal political economy, the oikonomia that you had in Greek society and that was accepted in Aristotle, is something that's very close to the Marxist conception of communism as like the remote future communism. So I hope that helps. If there's any other parts of this question that you want me to answer, please do let me know in the chat. But that's what I have to say about it.
Nice. Got another big super chat here from Jay Wolf. Thank you, Jay Wolf. Huge. Another $20 super chat. Getting some big spenders today. Appreciate you all. We are, of course, a people's funded institute completely. All the money that you donate to us will go towards the work that we are doing, the books that we are publishing, the video and text-based content that we're putting out, the articles we're putting out, and the ACP. So we appreciate you all. Your funding and support is what's allowed the ACP and what we have going on to materialize. But I see Carlos is laughing. I was laughing my ass off when I read this. And your recent
laughing at the myriads.
Oh,
I saw your video on Zuby, but I had no fucking clue who that was. So
you don't know Zuby? I mean, he's not very popular. If he was a better rapper, he wouldn't have to be a conservative grifter. But like, we should. If you listen to his songs, I guess we probably can't play them because we'll get copyrighted. But it's amazing that he is still trying to be a rapper. He should just stick with the conservative grifting. I think my version of his song "Okay Dude" was more fire than his version. He sounds so white. It's crazy. He sounds just like a white guy.
Oh man. When is the next banger?
I'll have to drop another track this weekend. I'll have to listen to some more Zuby songs though, which is gonna be pain.
Eddie's gonna be secretary of music for the ACP. Thank you so much for appreciating the book on American Marxism and the purity fetish. When is Mr. Krashevik's book coming out? That is a great question. That's a question I wake up every day and I ask myself. And every day I wake up and I call Noah, who's about to go to sleep at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, because he has to wake up early at 8 p.m. at night. I call him and I scream at him for 3 hours. Noah, when are you going to finish the pamphlet that you were supposed to finish 16 months ago, Noah? When is this pamphlet going to be? Every time I call him, he's like halfway through. He's like, I just wrote twice as much as what I was writing before. I'm like, where you by? I'm like, I'm about halfway through. I'm not going to make the joke that I was going to make, but it's incredible how many times he's rewritten the same thing. He's a perfectionist. He's got the purity fetish when it comes to his writing. He needs it to be perfect. It's just like Marx. Like Marx, instead of moving on and finishing volume 2, 3, or any of the other volumes he had planned, he kept on rewriting volume 1. And that's going to be Noah. So realistically, when is the book going to be out? 2042. That's that's when the book is going to be out. 2042. You can expect reproletarianization by 2042.
And that's not good because I have 2 papers planned in conjunction with reproletarianization. But whatever, I'll just keep working on mine, I guess.
I've been citing the book for like 2 years. And every time I cite it, it's like forthcoming 2023, forthcoming 2024. It's like, what the fuck?
Noah and I are going to do a presentation, though, in Chicago for the Revolution Report. After the ACP conference, the next get-together we do, Noah's going to present on reproletarianization, and then I'm going to present on the gold standard and labor theory of value in the stock market and financialization. So if you want to get the book in lecture form, there is that option.
Guys, I don't know if you've seen this number online, 2036. What it actually represents is the date that we're expecting Noah to finish his pamphlet by. That's what the real 2036 means.
Yep.
But
it's always meant.
Realistically, he says this year. So but
we'll see.
That's not very realistic.
He should be waking up for work in about 5 minutes. We can ask him. JK Lowe, total ACP victory. Absolutely. Thank you so much for the $10 super chat. Reiterate everything I said about the last super chat. Thank you all so much. And Slava says, yes, can't wait for the event with Noah and Eddie. Yes, thank you, Slava. Super excited for that. I think it'll be awesome. Obviously, know the event will be great. Slava always does an amazing job of organizing those. Super grateful for her and all the work she's been putting in for the ACP and Chicago Workers School and all that. So, yes, thank you so much, Slava. It's going to be a good event.
Eddie's paper is deep. He has gone. Eddie has read Volume 3 of Capital more closely than anyone I know. And I have a lot of friends that are like political economy professors and Marxists. Like he is really going in, and some of the messages, the voice messages he's been sending me are like insane in the weeds, but you have to go in the weeds to come out of it and be able to see clearly. And I think that that's something that he would realize. It's not just going in the weeds for the enjoyment of the jungle, but the other side is when you get the prize. And that's, the price is the clarity with which he's going to be able to understand the developments of modern capitalism.
Absolutely. Someone says, crossing my fingers and hope that he came out of the gold standard research learning modern monetary theory. Absolutely. Absolutely. That was a couple weeks ago. I dove into modern monetary theory just because my reading of volume 3 helped me to understand it, and it makes perfect sense. And I think Michael Hudson was actually influential in modern monetary theory too, which makes a lot of sense. But every modern theory having to do with currency and currency supply is pretty much going to be dealt with in this paper, and that includes modern monetary theory and I'm much more. I think modern monetary theory gets much more correct than, even though it's considered a heterodox theory, than much of mainstream economics. So I just like the weeds. There you go. That's not going to help you read Capital Volume 3, though. I'll tell you that. Gonna make it way harder.
What's the name of that guy that wears the boot on his head?
Vermin Supreme.
Yeah, that should be who we all vote for, by the way.
I'm down.
Not Ron Paul. Let's all vote for Vermin Supreme. That's the real Marxist. I think I've been using red pill really wrong for like a very long time.
Yeah.
I thought red pill just meant like the truth pill, but it seems to have a whole different meaning on the internet.
You're not online enough.
I'm not. I've been saying red pill left and right. I wonder how many people think I'm some fucking idiot. Oh man.
Yeah.
Like right there, I would have said that's the real red pill, but
it is. The real red pill is communism. The fake red pill, though, is like Andrew Tate and Fresh and Fit.
Okay, yeah. I always premise it by saying the real red pill. The truth pill.
I think people know what you mean. The good pearl knows what you mean.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Boomer Carlos.
It fits so well because the communists are red, as simplistic linguistic mentioned.
Exactly.
I am a boomer. I come from the generation of Kyle Pettis. In spirit, I'm a boomer. In body, Kyle Pettis is actually like a time traveler. I don't know if you guys knew that. Ask them what CPUSA and PSL have done in the last 20 years.
I went on a rant about PSL and CPUSA today on TikTok Live for a while. I was like going in on CPUSA and I was like, you know what? And here's what's wrong with PSL too. Which I think there's a higher likelihood that some of our TikTok audience is in PSL, but yeah, did we have any videos you wanted to react to today? Or any other topics you want to bring up?
Kyle Pettis is a 50-year-old who ages at half the speed. Yeah. He's either a 54-year-old that ages at half the speed or a 15-year-old that ages at twice the speed. Nothing in between. How was the reaction in the live before we go watch some videos? How was the reaction in the live to the PSL rants? Because it seems like TikTok is because of how liberalized it is, it would seem that PSL would be somewhat popular amongst the TikTok leftists.
Yeah, it wasn't. I didn't have anybody from PSL getting mad. I thought I would. I figured there would be people in there, but like, I mean, I couched it like, I'm like, PSL, these protests that they do are fine, and I'll go march with them against imperialism or whatever, but like, just explain how they've convinced themselves like activists and students are the revolutionary agent of history. Whoops. Something popped up on my YouTube in my phone. But it wasn't bad. There were over 100 people in there, and they were mostly agreeing with the critiques I was making. So, and I mean, people who have been in that organization, like, probably know what I'm saying is true implicitly, even if they're still in it. So there is a lot of people, because the thing was that for many years there was people that we kind of trained ideologically through the institute. They had nowhere to go, and some of them go CPUSA route. The people that went CPUSA route are already in the ACP, and others go into PSL. And just trust that there's a whole bunch of people like, that's it. I'm not going to say anything else. There's a lot of people that are in there and dissatisfied and might jump at some point. But did you see this? The trash cleaning? No, I didn't even see that.
Some of the PSL people were like calling us fascists and criticizing our trash cleaning, and then a few PSL chapters out of nowhere spontaneously decide to do the cleaning brigades out of. So,
Well, at least they're helping us clean. At least they're doing something productive. That's hilarious, though.
let's see. We're gonna have to chat.
Someone asked if we read Haas's Stubbs stack. Yeah, I read that whole interaction. It was pretty great.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah. I try not to comment much on it, but Haas completely took the dub, and it's very sad to see how some of the opponents have developed into just complete dog shit. Just people who are so fucking blinded, who literally have to reject the reality that they engage with. You know what they're doing, ACP, Eddie? It's the same thing. If you read Black Shirts and Reds, there's a passage at the beginning of one of the chapters where Michael Parenti says, this is how they would report in the Soviet Union. If there was no protest, it was because it was an autocratic, horrible government that didn't allow people to protest. If there was protest, it was because it's an autocratic, horrible government that people are protesting against. Like, there's no way for any action done by the Soviet Union to ever be interpreted fairly. Everything is going to be spun into something that is bad and cynical and horrendous. And they do the same fucking thing with the ACP. If we get smear pieces by CNN, it's because we're feds. And then if we don't get smear pieces by CNN, it's because we're feds. Like, literally whatever we do, they find a way to spin it as we're feds, we're grifters, we're fascists, whatever it might be. There's people saying that the bourgeois media attacking us with all their might in as unfaithful and ridiculous a form as possible, as they just have with the CNN, which, by the way, was delayed for this Sunday. There's people saying that that is a sign of us being feds. It's so completely irrational. It's the same thing as how the Western Marxists think about China. There's this book that Roland Bohr does that the cadre are supposed to be reading and tested on. It's called Socialism with Chinese Characteristics. And at the beginning of the book, he goes through all of the incredibly ridiculous, mind-bending exercises that the Western Marxists have to do in order to legitimize their claims about China. Even if there's no evidence for something, there's always some secret conspiracy that's posited by their minds. And that's the same thing that they do with ACP. There's no evidence, so they go to, yes, but in reality, this is what they actually think. There's no evidence at all that we have any fascist sensibilities. There's a plethora of years long of evidence to the contrary. Yes, but in reality, psychologically, what they really think is this and that, and I can access them, through some telekinesis, psychopathic activity or some shit. It's so completely ridiculous. And for people who claim to be Marxists, claim to be critical in their thinking, to stoop to these low levels, it's honestly sad. It's almost a tragedy, because if they wouldn't have been so completely blinded by this abstract and indeterminate hatred of this new resurgent communist movement, and if that blinding wouldn't have been rooted in the fact that all of these people are PMC and have their material interests attached to the academy, they would have been maybe potential class traitors and people who could have joined the movement. And that's why it's a tragedy, because they're not extreme idiots, but they've reduced any intellectual capacity they have when it comes to speaking about the ACP. They lose all sort of critical thinking skills. They accept what the mainstream media says. They accept what the compatible left says. Everything is accepted when it comes to the ACP.
I mean, you had smart people like sharing that article from the New York Times calling Jackson a Fed, and like sharing it with us. Like, did you see this? I think this guy's a Fed. Like, the New York Times? The New York Times was the main paper that lied us into the Iraq War. Like, what are we talking about? It's these people who are otherwise intelligent, right, and have critical thinking skills, but when it comes to Jackson Hinkle, because he tweeted a picture of him defending Trump with an AK-47 or something ridiculous, they can't think critically about it. They're like, I'll just believe what CNN and the New York Times tell me. What the hell is wrong with you guys? You're just a bunch of cowards who don't want to lose their social standing within the academy. And, academics act like they're the brains of the nation, but actually they're at shit. And, I'll die on that hill of rocks. That's a hill of rocks that I'll die on.
Yeah, man, that famous Lenin quote, it still holds true. And I mean, for a lot of these people, it's not even the academy. It's like a subgroup within the academy. Like, if at least they were selling out to the academy, making, six figures, it'd be like, okay, it's understandable, the opportunism that you have. But you're selling out to a left that has done nothing, that has done absolutely nothing. In 2 months of operation, the ACP, just by the attacks that we have received on the part of the state, has shown itself to be a bigger threat to the actually existing order in the U.S. than any of the organizations in the American left can prove in the last 2, 3, 4 decades of work. That's just an objective reality. So it's so incredibly sad how the levels of stupidity that people reduce themselves to because they let emotion get in the way. And what's interesting is that a lot of these people, because they have very liberal sensibilities, they end up positing themselves as the sort of representatives of some romanticized conception of the global South, right? A lot of these people are like third worldists or national nihilists. I mean, Colin was explicitly defending national nihilism, which is just a liberal form of American exceptionalism. But what's interesting is that if you actually go to the global South, who do they love? Who did they love in Venezuela? And I saw this in person. I also saw it in Mexico, like with Marxist, communist scholars and militant. They loved Jackson. In Venezuela, the ambassador to the U.S., he spoke with Jackson. They had agreed to an interview that couldn't be conducted because of everything that went on. And he told him, hey, that picture, that meme that you posted with Maduro, it was hilarious. I loved it. I shared it. And then the guy was hyped to be interviewed by Jackson. So why is it that these people that claim to represent the sensibilities of the third world and all these different things, why is it that they condemn it, but then the supposedly third world itself is able to appreciate Jackson and all of the work that we do? It's so completely backwards. And they end up functioning as a sort of pseudo-Marxist equivalent of people like Spivak and the post-colonial theorists who posit themselves as the only ones that can speak for the third world. But I'm sorry, guys, when I look at the protests of Indian farmers and Indian workers, and when I look at the one successful state in India that's like ran by workers, which is Kerala, I don't see Spivak. You know who I see? I see Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao. I see communist thinkers. I don't see fucking Spivak. And it's the same thing here. When the working classes of the global South, of oppressed countries, think about American communists, a lot of them are thinking about Hinkle, and he's literally the most viral American communist in Billy. And a lot of them now, because of the connection to the ACP, are thinking about the ACP as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, someone in the chat says, oh, one guy likes Jackson Hinkle. Nicolas Maduro, dumbass. That isn't just one guy. It's the president and the leader of the socialist movement. Jeez, these people.
I'm telling you, it's not one guy. I saw there hundreds of, it was the largest delegation they've ever done. It was more than 1,000 people. I spoke with hundreds of leaders from the global South. Almost all of them knew Jackson and appreciated his work. I got to meet and speak with Mandela's grandson because he has a very close relationship and friendship with Jackson. It's so fucking ridiculous. Most of those 2.7 million followers are from the global South. They're not even like, I mean, there's a lot of them, of course, that are from the US, but the vast majority of them are from the global South.
Yeah,
when is a
we wish.
PSL? When is a PSL rep going to speak in front of Ansar Allah?
Exactly. Yeah, and we wish, more of his followers were American, because so we have more of an influence in America. But it is a lot of, people in the global South or the colonized world. So critique him if you want, but he ain't no Fed. Only USA leftoids hate Jackson. He is loved outside of that bubble. Yeah, and it's even a lot of that is isolated to like online or like very small bubbles. Like the more time I spend in my community and talk with people who consider themselves communists, like most of them like Jackson, a lot of this like rage is isolated to weird spaces on Twitter. But
What connections to the establishment? This is so fucking mentally ill. Dude, the guy's literally been kicked out of like almost every single platform. Like he got kicked out of a dating site because of his politics. What?
He has to go get a job in Russia because he's been blackballed from the U.S. media. But sure. Whatever you say. I'm sure he's working for the CIA, as they literally tweet out his location when he's in Venezuela so that gangs can hunt him down. That's what always happens to CIA agents, right? They get targeted by CIA-backed right-wing gangs. Like, get your head out of your ass, brother. It's deep up in there.
Nancy Pelosi's youth council. Yeah, when he was fucking 16, 17, running for office as a Bernie progressive. What are you going to say, that we're like secret social democrats because we worked for Bernie in 2020? Like, what the fuck? These people, this is why it's so inconsistent, because they claim to be Marxist. They can even tell you, yes, the Marxist worldview is about looking at things in the process, in the development, looking at contradictions, looking at the interconnections of all the different things of the world, looking at things from the angle of the totality. And they sit here and say, yeah, we have to condemn this guy with 2.7 million followers that has been calling himself a communist for years now, because when he was 17, he did some shit with Nancy Pelosi's youth council.
Or with Tulsi Gabbard, like, who, was one of the leading anti-war voices on a lot of issues back then. Yeah, she's got a lot of stuff wrong with her, but having a minor connection to Tulsi Gabbard 6 years ago doesn't make you a Fed, bro. Like, shut up. Thank you to Josh Wiederholt for the $4. He sent 2 super stickers. Appreciate you, Josh. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. Anything else you wanted to cover today, Carlos?
You had sent me a couple videos to react to. One of them.
Let's do the Piers Morgan one.
Yeah, that's the more recent one.
I'm smirking at you because you are clearly being dishonest.
Like, you're smirking. You can explain why.
It's funny the way in which you always frame things. People are not intimidated by you. That's the problem. You can intimidate some of your own people, but you can't intimidate us.
I don't intimidate anybody. I want to get to the. I want to find out. I'm just fascinated.
So don't be silly.
An Iranian professor humiliated Piers Morgan on his own show, leading to career-ending embarrassment to Piers Morgan.
How would you categorize what happened on October the 7th? Was that a terrorist attack?
No, it was a retaliation of a people who were imprisoned and who were starved and who were regularly battered, and people who were imprisoned
Do you think, just to be clear, you think that the slaughter of 1,200 people, the raping, the maiming, the incinerating, the mass murder that went on that day by a group whose own spokesman, the Hamas spokesman, said days after that, on television, on camera, that Hamas was wedded to committing the same act again and again and again, as often as it could, which actually is the purest personification of the genocide that you're talking about. You don't condemn that.
You're being dishonest. There is no evidence.
No, I'm not.
There's no evidence of rape, and I ask your viewers.
Absolute nonsense.
Yes,
nonsense.
It's absolute nonsense that there's systematic rape, and if you are being dishonest intentionally, you are helping the Israeli regime continue its genocide by justifying it through dishonesty. So that's up to you to decide. There's no evidence of systematic rape, and just like the beheadings,
there has been clear reported evidence of rape and sexual abuse against Israeli women.
All of the evidence, all of the people that reported it, and specifically the most largest outlet, which was the New York Times, they had to backtrack all of the bullshit they reported, all of the atrocity propaganda that was aimed at a sensationalism that wanted to dehumanize the Palestinians in order to cover and lend credence to Israel's genocide. That is, all of that has been debunked. And what you have to ask yourself when these debunkings come about, if you believed in the propaganda, what you have to ask yourself is, why did they get you to fall for it again? Haven't you learned after, decades of false flags and fake attacks and the babies in incubators and the Libyan army raping women, like giving them haven't you learned that they do this sensationalist atrocity propaganda to tear at your heartstrings, to pull your heartstrings and get you to support imperialist policies that actually kill people, especially in this case where there's been thousands and thousands of murdered babies, where there's been actual evidence of Zionist leaders saying that rape is legitimized, where there's whole court cases of Zionist settlers getting outraged because they're about to be held accountable for rapes of prisoners of war. I mean, it's pure projection. The animality that they project onto the Palestinians with fake news and atrocity propaganda is a pure reflection of the animality of this Zionist Nazi society.
Right, and Piers knows that. He's been interviewing guys like this for months now. Some of the greatest minds on this issue have been on his show, but he, as actually Andrew Tate told him to his face, he has to remain ignorant, otherwise he wouldn't have the job that he has. So he just sits here, like a complete buffoon, repeating the same debunked talking points over and over and over again. And what's interesting about this interview is he's completely outmatched here. He gets absolutely cooked, and you'll see he reverts basically to this old school European colonial racism, which is really the basis of his ideology, right? He supports the Anglo-Saxon Empire. He supports the U.S. and Britain and their military outpost in Israel being allowed to do whatever they want, and to justify it by just dehumanizing the enemy and saying we are moral and they are not. And that's where his argument is going to end up floundering in this stupid, like old school colonial place. But he gets destroyed for a while before that happens.
Beautifully said.
I refer you and your audience to the good work carried out by people at the Gray Zone, at the Electronic Intifada, based in the United States. Many of them are people of they're excellent reporters, and you should invite them on your show to talk about these allegations.
By the way, the Gray Zone guys have came out and talked about how ridiculous the CNN propaganda smear piece on ACP and Jackson is. So like the people that are like the archetypes of debunking the bullshit of the establishment and the elite and the imperialists and the fascists, those people are also debunking the nonsense that they're doing on ACP.
Yep.
Reporters who covered this.
Well,
I'm also interested, Professor, that you only want to deny that there was rape. You don't want to deny the incineration or the beheading or the mass murder of Holocaust survivors, the kidnapping of several hundred people, including babies. I mean, do you condemn any of that? Or do you think all of that is justified?
You're trying to play with words, and that's fine.
Holocaust survivors? Bruh.
What a rave.
How many Holocaust survivors are still alive in Israel? And yeah, they were at a rave. Like... He's so stupid.
As long as you're not trying to you're playing because there's no evidence of beheadings. You're just taking the dishonest Israeli regime's account, which they have no evidence, and people have been articles.
There was demonstrable, proven evidence that people were beheaded. Provable evidence. And
so
more than that, we know from Hamas's own video coverage of what they were doing in real time that they proudly broadcast to the world. We didn't try and hide this. I'm just curious why you, who is so incensed by what you see as Israeli genocide, why you would not be equally incensed by genocidal behavior from Hamas.
There was demonstrable proof that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. There was demonstrable proof that Gaddafi was giving his soldiers Viagra to rape women. There was demonstrable proof for everything. And then it turns out that demonstrable proof never existed. It's like they have to convince you by saying the words, we have a Cartesian level of indubitability for this, and then show you that they have no proof, that it was actually a very doubtable and uncertain thing.
No, you're not being honest. And where did they broadcast this footage of beheadings of Hamas to the world? Can you put it right now where you have
I didn't say they broadcast the beheadings. There was evidence found of people who'd been beheaded. That was not broadcast. But what was broadcast was the ones. I didn't say there was footage of the beheading. I said there was evidence found that people had been beheaded.
He did say there was footage. He said he said Hamas broadcast it to the world, and then the professor says, "Show us then," and Pierce said, "I didn't say that." He's so pompous and dumb. It's like maximum arrogance combined with max ignorance, and it just makes you want to slap him.
Yeah, and it's just pure aura of Anglo authority with the suit and the shirt and the nice background and nice studio and the British accent, which automatically lends more credence to your views. I can't do accents. All right.
So say to you, but what was broadcast by Hamas of Hamas slaughtering people and kidnapping people, I'm proudly boasting about it. Something you seem to be smirking about.
I'm smirking at you. I'm smirking at you because you are clearly being dishonest. If there were people, innocent people, anywhere, whether in Palestine or elsewhere, who were killed by a soldier, by anyone, that is, of course, unacceptable. But these claims of systematic rape, these are dishonest claims. People have done hard work to prove that there is no evidence for these systematic rapes and beheadings, and these were used as propaganda to justify the beginning of this Holocaust in Gaza. And those who continue to make these
you talk about me being dishonest, Professor. You talk about me being dishonest, but what you've just said is an absolutely shocking example of dishonesty. Hamas didn't even try to hide what they did. They made no secret of their delight, their joy, their pride in what they were doing. Some of them rang family members back in Gaza to boast about what they'd just done to old women, to children. And I'm just curious why you can't find yourself able to condemn it.
In the day and age when everyone has cameras, and there are cameras all over the place, show us the evidence. Show us the evidence. Especially in Israel, which is a society which has cameras all over the place, but you don't have footage of any beheadings, and you don't have any footage of any rape. I wonder why.
Well, there were bodies found who had been beheaded. That is a fact.
So, okay, show them all these bodies that have been beheaded. Show them on your show. Show those pictures.
How many people do you think were killed that day?
I think roughly between 1,100 and 1,200. Many of them were soldiers.
So you accept there was a mass slaughter. Does that constitute genocide to you? Is that an attempted genocide?
No, it's like you saying that the French resistance, which was operating against the Nazis, and they go and carry out an operation, and during that operation, some children are sadly killed. So you say, oh, so the whole French resistance is illegitimate, and the Nazis' occupation is legitimate. That's nonsense. If, as I said very clearly, wherever an innocent person is killed, that I condemn, everyone condemns, and I wish you would condemn, because a genocide is taking place, and you are putting forward claims without the justification to make them, without the evidence to make them. I would refer you again to those websites and those reporters and journalists who've proven that the claims were inaccurate, to say the least, and dishonest, most probably.
What is the view from Tehran about what's happened here?
The view from Tehran is quite clear. You know quite well, I know quite well, your viewers know quite well, that the Israeli regime is carrying out genocide. And this stems from ethno-supremacist ideology. It stems from apartheid, and this is unacceptable. Expelled the people in Gaza. They live in a concentration camp, now a death camp. And the West has brought about this situation. Whatever crimes that they've committed against Jews and Gypsies and Slavs, they have to pay for it themselves. They can't take it out on the Palestinian people. So the Iranians, along with almost everyone else in the world, except for some people in your part of the world, believe that the apartheid regime has to come to an end. And by coming to an end, it means that all people of that land have to be
of the Iranian regime is that Israel shouldn't exist, right?
Well, the position of the British regime is that Israel as an apartheid state should continue to exist. The position of the American regime is that Israel...
Look, that wasn't the question I asked you, but is the position of Iran's regime...
I'm answering.
Yeah, but what is the answer to that question?
I'm getting there. The position of the American regime is that apartheid should continue. Iran's position on South Africa had the same gap. There was the same gap back then when the British and Americans supported apartheid in South Africa and racial supremacism in the South African region, Zimbabwe today, and so on. Back then, Iran was supporting indigenous population. Back then, Iran supported the ANC. Back then, Iran supported the military wing of the ANC and Nelson Mandela.
But we're not talking about South Africa. I'm talking about what is Iran's regime's current position in relation to Israel.
The Iranians believe that Israel does not have moral legitimacy as an apartheid regime. And the only way that it can gain legitimacy is that if apartheid is cast aside, if ethno-supremacism is cast aside, if racial and religious discrimination in the sense that Muslims and Christians are lesser human beings and they don't have any right to the land that they've been on for hundreds of years, that should be set aside. People who have been expelled have the right of return. It's not very complicated. It's not, as you say, rocket science.
Iran has had a vested interest in supporting terror against Israel for a very long time.
No, I think the regimes that have a vested interest in supporting terrorism are the ones who are giving the Israeli regime the weapons to carry out genocide, and the genocide began long before October the 7th. And the Gaza Strip was a concentration camp long before October the 7th. You know as well as I that October the 7th didn't.
He doesn't even mention that Iran has played a major role in fighting groups like ISIS in the region.
Yep.
And the main groups who have been backing extremists have been Saudi Arabia, the United States, and Israel. Whether in Syria or in Libya or Afghanistan, this has been going on for years and years and years. Jihadist extremism, this sort of right-wing Muslim ideology, would not be as prominent as it is if it wasn't for the U.S. funneling, billions of dollars in arms to Osama bin Laden's Mujahideen in the 70s against the Soviet Union. They splintered into different groups such as Al Qaeda and the Taliban that are still around today. We backed the Free Syrian Army in Syria, which was aligned with groups like al-Nusra, Al Qaeda, and ISIS themselves. Israel also backed them and was openly saying that they viewed ISIS as a strategic ally in that war. So if there's any regimes that are backing terrorism in the Middle East, it's the U.S., Israel, and Saudi Arabia, whereas Iran, really, if we're being honest, they mostly do the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're very tempered. Jesus Christ. There we go. They're very tempered with even their responses to the attacks that Israel carries out. And they're playing the long game. They realize that Israel, as a pawn of Western imperialism, is like the Western imperialism itself. It serves on a period of sharp decline, while BRICS and this new multipolar world is in a period of sharp ascendancy. So if they have the opportunity to carry out a fight, why do it now? Why not wait for the West to get weaker, for them to get stronger, and carry out a fight on better terms for them? That's why it's very scary what the U.S., the position that the U.S. is in right now, because they want war now. That's what they want. They realize they're getting weaker, and if they have any possibility at winning this holocaust of a war, it has to be carried out now. This is what the censorship is about. This is what the political repression is about. This is what all of it is all about. The U.S. realizes it's on decline. It can't reject this reality that's in front of its face. And the only way that they have even a semblance of a chance to continue its imperialist order is by fighting now. And there's not a chance that they're going to win. But the rest of the world, if there's going to be a fight, they want to delay it as much as possible because they see the spiral downhill that the U.S. is taking.
In a vacuum. And the terrorism has been carried out regularly by the Israeli regime on the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip for decades. It regularly bombed them and killed them. And it's not just the Gaza Strip. I think roughly 400 Palestinians have been murdered in the West Bank over the past 6 months. These are regular occurrences, but it doesn't register in the West because, again, the Israelis are European. It's a European colony. They have priorities over the brown people of the land. But it is a fact that Palestinian children, according to the statements made by senior Israeli officials, Palestinian women, according to members of the Knesset, they are lesser people. If you look at the South African complaint, they clearly point out the views of these people and the starvation siege and the intention to starve the people of Gaza, women and children. That is because they look at them as inferior people. This is not about two armies. This is about a subjugated people trying to stand up for their rights. So don't be silly. The Israeli regime, they're always lying, just like the Al-Shifa hospital. They're full of underground tunnels. Where were the tunnels? And then at the beginning, when they struck the Al-Hili hospital and killed hundreds of people, they said, no, it was the resistance. And the Western intelligence agencies said the same thing. And then we saw them hit hospital after hospital after hospital after hospital. So you put your faith in the narrative of these child killers who bomb hospitals and destroy the very basis of humanity, the very basic needs for ordinary people in Gaza. The Holocaust continues as we speak today. When the president of Brazil and other world leaders say what the Israeli regime is doing today to the people of Gaza is just like what the Nazis were doing in Germany, no one is going to forget because the Iranians retaliated.
If Israel does strike Iran, it has a far more sophisticated and powerful military capacity. And if America was to defend it against any further retaliation of the kind that you're describing, then Iran would get wiped away, wouldn't it? I mean, you can't possibly compete with the combined military firepower of countries like Israel and America. Why would you pretend otherwise?
That's your wishful
So
thinking.
there
The
it
Israeli
is.
regime is vulnerable and weak, and it is
So Piers is completely intellectually destroyed. Can't make any rebuttals at this point to the professor. Every wild atrocity propaganda claim that he's thrown has been completely dismantled by the professor. So what does he fall back to? Well, we could wipe Iran off the map. You're lucky America and Britain and Israel don't wipe you off the map. We'll crush Iran. And it shows this, the colonial mindset that Piers is working from in its, distilled and more raw form. And it shows the arrogance of these imperialists, and they don't recognize, dude, a war with Iran would be devastating. Iran is not Iraq, right? Iran has a much stronger industrial base, many more connections and alliances around the world, including in that region. And the idea that the U.S. and Israel could just wipe out Iran no problem is completely ludicrous. Completely ludicrous. It would, not only would it, if they were able to topple the government, it would create a disaster where they'd have to be, stuck there for years after. But it would not be like Iraq, where they just toppled Saddam Hussein's government very quickly. It would, the Iranian Revolution would put up a big fight. They would have groups like Hezbollah and potentially Syria and potentially Yemen coming to their aid. It would probably create a huge regional war that would be disastrous for the U.S. So Piers' idea that the U.S. can just go in and wipe out Iran, I mean, this has been the fantasy of John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and Elliot Abrams and these guys for decades. They've just wished ever since the revolution, the Islamic Revolution, they've wished that they could just squash Iran off the map, but it's always been a fantasy because Iran is an intelligent country, they're a measured country, and they're a country with a very socialistic, centrally planned economy that provides a solid standard of living for their people and has created a strong industrial base that they could use to really wage a war that would be terrible for the United States if we were to actually invade. So Piers is ignorant and just being an old school British colonialist here, which I'm sure that's in his blood.
And he's being a masochist, man. He's got to be a masochist. The dude brings on people to just completely whip him like a few times a week. He has to get something off of that. Perhaps he's like some people here in the U.S. that like getting spanked. But it's very similar to Thucydides' Pericles' funeral oration. It's very much rooted in the colonial hubris of a decaying empire.
Yes.
It has shown itself to be incapable of taking a dot on the map. They haven't been able to take Gaza after 6 months of genocide. They haven't been able to take even northern Gaza after 6 months of genocide. They have to withdraw at least 100 to 200,000 people from northern Israel because they cannot stand up to Hezbollah. They cannot push Hezbollah back. They cannot defeat them. So you think the Israeli regime is going to defeat Iran? Your media outlets in the West have been misleading the people for 2 years now, saying Ukraine is winning, Ukraine is winning. Suddenly everyone is saying Ukraine is falling apart. Dishonest narratives and reporting dishonestly to your own people ultimately hurt the people of England and Europe and the United States. And your endless wars based upon this nonsense and this misinformation lead to huge waves of refugees, and then the people of Europe feel overwhelmed by these refugees that you yourself brought upon yourself. When the West continues to support the atrocities carried out by the Israelis, when the West openly supports an ethno-supremacist regime, and when the West supports a genocide, the public across the region is turning not only against the Israeli regime, but against the West. A few families who are ruling over countries are not public opinion. And ultimately, by pursuing this, they are creating a rage that they cannot stop in future. And just one final point on a personal note. I experienced what the West does to the non-Western world. When your governments were supporting Saddam Hussein, when your governments were arming him in the 1980s, before you turned against him, your governments gave him chemical weapons. I survived 2 of those chemical weapons attacks. I survived both mustard gas and I survived nerve agents that were provided by Western governments to Saddam Hussein. And many people did not survive. The intentions of Western regimes are not benign. Your governments have done nothing but ruin and destruction for our part of the world and for much of the rest of the world. And now, because of the mess that you've created across the board, you're now ruining the lives of your own people.
Oh, what a beautiful destruction, dude. Like, Piers is a punching bag at this point, like Carlos was saying. But that might be the worst I've ever seen him get destroyed. The way he explains how, no, you wouldn't just trample over Iran in a war. You've been telling people that you've been winning this war in Ukraine for years, and now they're realizing that that's not the case. And the idea that we're, the terrorists, when you gave Saddam Hussein nerve gas that was used to kill Iranians en masse, before you turned around and toppled Saddam and brought groups like ISIS to power. So the idea that the U.S. can accuse Iran of terrorism and use that as reason to try and wipe them off the map is completely insane because, like we said, Israel, the U.S., Saudi Arabia, these are the number one state sponsors of terrorism in the world. It's not Iran. It's not Cuba. It's not China. It's not whoever else.
You're absolutely right, brother. Well, this has been a very fun stream. Thank you to all of those that were with us in the stream. Thank you to Pavel for the donations. Thank you so much, Comrade, consistent donator to the Institute. Thank you to Comrade CJ. Thank you to John, consistent donator to the Institute. Thank you, Comrade. Thank you, Jay Wolf. Thank you, JK Loki. Thank you. God damn you, Eddie. Oh man, I'm trying to hold it in. And oh God. Oh my God. This is what I get for like working from like 8 a.m. with my brain for like 12 hours and then stream.
Yes.
It's
impossible to hold up at this point.
I can't hold it.
I appreciate you doing this late night stream with me, though. This is a good one.
This was fun. But all right, well, thank you to all of you who stuck around this long. We'll see you next time. I'm doing a stream tomorrow with Noah. I don't know, Eddie, if you're joining that one. That one should be fun. The first
I'll
time
definitely join, yeah.
The whole gang gets together in, I think, a couple months now. And then on Friday, I'll be doing a stream with Danny in Spanish. So we want to continue the Spanish streams, do at least a couple a month. We're going to be talking about his detainment, the Western left, and much more. So
that's going to be great. I'm excited to hear what Danny has to say.
Yeah, and I've been kind of surprised by how good of a reception the Spanish work has gotten, and it seems like some of the more active people in our audience, at least some of them, I think they came in with some of the Spanish content, or at least were Spanish speakers. So,
nice.
Yeah, I'm looking to do a whole lot more of that. I am compiling a list of professors that I'm going to invite over to interview. If you speak Spanish and haven't already, make sure to see the last interview I did with Professor Oscar Rojas. It's really a treat. He's absolutely brilliant. But yeah, look out for that. Tomorrow's stream, Sunday stream, and we'll see you next time. Good night, everyone.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, for you have nothing if you have no right. Let racist ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. Freedom is merely privilege extended, unless enjoyed by one and all. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. Let no one build walls to divide us, walls of hatred nor walls of stone. Come greet the dawn and stand beside us. We'll live together or we'll die alone. In our world poisoned by exploitation, those who have taken, now they must give. And end the vanity of nations, we've but one earth on which to live. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. And so begins the Israel's final drama in the streets and in the fields. We stand unbowed before their armor. We defy their guns and shields. When we fight, provoked by their aggression, let us be inspired by life and love. For though they offer us concessions, change will not come from above. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The International idea